Obsession has all the ingredients for a strong supernatural horror film. It's a modern spin on the be careful what you wish for tradition. On paper, it looks like a blend of the monkey's paw and classic love potion stories. But does it deliver a timeless cautionary tale, or has feminist ideology poisoned the premise? In this review, I'm going to take a look at the film's craftsmanship, its standout performances, and where it goes wrong. The movie has real strengths in tension and acting, but at its core, it transforms a potentially universal story about desire and consequences into a one-sided lecture on male entitlement and consent. We'll compare it directly to the original traditions, examine how the wish plays out, and discuss why this kind of reframing matters. First, let's take a quick recap of the story without major spoilers. Here's the basic setup without spoiling the major turns. Obsession follows Bear, played by Michael Johnston, an ordinary guy working in a music store who has quietly had a crush on his co-worker and friend Nikki, portrayed by Indy Neverett. And I hope I said that right, because I've never heard the name actually spoken. After another round of mixed signals and friend zone frustration, Bear comes across a mysterious novelty item called the One Wish Willow. In a moment of weakness, he makes a simple but powerful wish: for Nikki to love him more than anyone else in the world. What follows is a supernatural descent into obsession, shifting relationship dynamics, and escalating horror that tests their friend group and forces Bear to confront the consequences of tampering with desire. The film draws from classic be careful what you wish for territory, blending psychological tension with body horror elements in a modern setting. On the surface, it feels like it could be a straightforward update to The Monkey's Paw or a dark love potion story. But as we'll see, the execution takes it in a very specific direction. Before we get into the critique, let's talk about what the movie actually does well. I have to give credit where credit is due. Obsession succeeds on several key levels as a horror film. Director Curry Barker, coming from a YouTube background, shows impressive control behind the camera. For a relatively low-budget production, the film builds genuine tension and unease. Technically, the film looks good, and the practical effects deliver some memorable body horror and grotesque moments, without relying too much on cheap jump scares. The real standout here is Indy Neverett's performance as Nikki. She brings tremendous range and commitment to the role, moving convincingly between relatable, sarcastic friend and something far more unsettling and tragic. Her physicality and emotional intensity carried large portions of the movie and make the supernatural elements land with real weight. Michael Johnston is solid as Bear, effectively portraying a regular guy whose quiet desperation slowly turns into dread and regret. The supporting cast, including the friend group, feels overall pretty natural and grounded, which helps sell the early relationship dynamics and group fallout. There are flashes of humor that break up the tension effectively, and the sound design and score enhance the growing sense of wrongness. And now that I think about it, wrongness is the perfect word to describe the type of horror you have here. It's horror in that everything just feels like it's wrong. It makes you uneasy. It makes you want to cringe and shy away from what you're seeing. It's uncomfortable horror. As pure horror craftsmanship, Obsession is one of the more competent indie efforts in recent years. It respects the audience's intelligence enough to let dread build gradually, and overall it does a pretty okay job of delivering on the horror that it promises. With that said, let's get to the core question at the heart of the film. So now let's get right down to the heart of it. Is Obsession a genuine monkey's paw story, or is it a classic love potion tale that's been poisoned by modern feminism? First, remember what these traditions actually are. The first one is the obvious, previously mentioned monkey's paw. That was a classic cautionary tale about the dark side of desire, and not necessarily desire as in sexual desire. Your first wish that the monkey's paw granted you was usually something seemingly harmless. In the original story, the man wanted 200 pounds, but what happens is the monkey's paw always twists your wish horrifically, and in the original story, the couple's son dies in a horrible industrial accident, and the compensation they get from his death is 200 pounds. And generally what usually happens is the second wish makes things even worse when they try and correct whatever they wished for the first time. The original story of the man's wife wishes she could have her son back. Of course, being the monkey's paw, what does come back is worse than the death itself. And the third wish is wasted to save themselves from the consequences of their desires. And the second concept, which is much more pleasant than the monkey's paw, is the idea of the love potion or the love spell. You know how it goes. Give the object of your affection this love potion, and she will love you forever. Or wave your magic wand and say the magic word, citrus linoleum, and then she's yours forever. So what you had here was basically a magical shortcut that bypassed natural courtship. It forced the outcome that you actually wanted, and historically it often backfired. Like, you'd have jealousy, tragedy, or some unintended targets. But the focus of the backfiring was usually on drama, irony, comedy, human folly, that kind of thing. In classic tales, the love potions or the love spells, they genuinely rewire the target's mind and emotions. They're not being possessed and they're not being controlled. That person authentically falls in love or lust, depending on the story, with whoever cast the spell or gave them the potion. The pre-spell rejection is acknowledged, but once the magic takes hold, the story treats the new reality as authentic desire, not an ongoing crime. Now look at obsession. Bear makes a simple wish for Nikki to love him more than anyone else. In a pure monkey's paw or love potion setup, you'd expect either ironic external consequences or a story about how engineered love inevitably corrupts. Instead, the film gives us something very different. The wish doesn't create real mutual love. It summons some kind of possessing entity or doppelganger that hijacks Nikki's body. On the outside, she acts obsessively affectionate, but the real Nikki is trapped inside, suffering, terrified, fighting to break through. Bear sees the cracks, the glitches, the moments of horror, yet the relationship continues, including intimate scenes. The movie doesn't treat this as a tragic irony or the dark side of desire. It frames it explicitly as violation. This is where the feminist poisoning becomes clear. Rather than letting the supernatural premise play out as raw human folly, the film injects heavy modern consent ideology. Nikki's performance is weaponized to emphasize her lack of agency at every turn. Dialogue from friends and her own outbursts start sounding like mandatory workshops on boundaries, entitlement, and air quotes nice guy psychology. The director has openly discussed the themes of consent and communication. Critics praise it as a timely exploration of coercion and male control. In short, they've taken the escapist fantasy at the heart of love potions, the idea that magic could create genuine reciprocal desire, and turned it into a supernatural date rape allegory. The air quotes love isn't real transformation, it's a grotesque performance layered over a victim's suffering. Bear isn't just dealing with the monkey's paw consequences for tampering with fate. He's portrayed as complicit in ongoing psychological and sexual violation. This doesn't add depth to the story. It narrows the story to fit a specific ideological lens. Male desire, even expressed through impossible magic, is inherently dangerous and suspect. Female agency must remain sacred, even when the premise is literally supernatural possession. Classic tales allowed ambiguity and universal tragedy. Obsession demands you see it through the prism of power dynamics and victimhood. That's the poison. The film had all the ingredients for a strong cautionary horror story about shortcuts in love and life. Instead, feminism turns the wish into evidence of male wrongdoing from the start. And this shift isn't harmless. It affects how we think about real relationships. Obsession really isn't a monkey's paw tale. It's more of a poisoned love potion story. Since Bear only has one wish instead of the usual three, he has no opportunity to accidentally make things worse with the second wish, and then eventually save himself with the last one. Now, Bear essentially tries to get a second wish by giving Ian one of those one-wish willows. Now, Ian obviously doesn't believe that this little novelty toy works as it's supposed to, so instead of doing what Bear asked him to do, he just flippantly wishes he had $1 billion. Instantly, all this cash starts raining down with seemingly no negative consequences. And that's where the movie doesn't feel like it stays with its own flavor. When Bear gets his wish, it goes horribly wrong. But when Ian asks for the money, it just shows up, and there doesn't seem to be any obvious negative consequence to it. And somebody's typing in the comments right now, well, Ian does suffer negative consequences, is that when he goes back to Bear's place, Nikki shoots him in the head. Technically, you are correct, but it feels very lazy if that's actually the case, if that is actually what his negative consequence ends up being. That would be like the guy in the original Monkey's Paw story who wanted the 200 pounds, winning some kind of prize or lottery, then getting shot and killed for the money on his way home. While that's still a horrific ending to the character, it doesn't fit the flavor of the Monkey's Paw, because the Monkey's Paw actually grants you what you wish for. But if you die immediately taking possession of what you asked for, you really don't end up actually getting what you wanted. You have to get what you want and pay a terrible price while still having what you wanted. The only exception to this rule tends to be on the final wish, where it seems to let the wisher actually wrap up whatever's going on without additional serious negative side effects. And while there are a total of 3 wishes granted in the movie Obsession, they're all granted to 3 different people, and they do not progressively make things worse, only for the last wish to basically save them in the end. So for all those reasons, Obsession is not so much a monkey's paw tale, but it's one about a poisoned love potion. This might sound like just one little minor gripe about a single horror movie, but the way Obsession twists the monkey's paw and love potion traditions reveals something deeper about how feminist ideology is reshaping storytelling, and it's not for the better. Classic cautionary tales warned everyone about the dangers of shortcuts, hubris, and tampering with natural forces. They were universal. A man's wish gone wrong was about human nature, not proof that male desire itself is the problem. Love potions offered escapist fantasy. It was the dream of mutual passion without the usual risk of rejection. Even when they ended in tragedy, the tragedy belonged to both parties. In Obsession, feminism poisons that framework by turning the wish into a non-consensual possession and framing Bear's actions as ongoing violation. The movie doesn't explore the full horror of engineered love. Instead, it narrows everything down to a gendered morality play. Male initiative bad, female victimhood sacred. The supernatural premise, literally magic, still gets filtered through real-world consent ideology. The result is a story that feels smaller, more preachy, and less honest about the messy reality of desire. Now, all of this matters because culture shapes expectations. When popular films consistently portray normal male longing, even in pure fantasy, as dangerous entitlement, it reinforces distrust between men and women. We're already seeing the consequences in the real world. Record numbers of young men checking out of dating entirely, rising loneliness, collapsing marriage and birth rates. Media like this doesn't help bridge that gap. It adds to the noise that tells men their natural instincts are suspect and that any imperfect pursuit is a form of harm. Feminism here doesn't add meaningful depth or nuance. It flattens complex human experiences into oppressor versus oppressed dynamics. Prioritizes protecting female agency at all cost, even when the story's own premise involves literal supernatural possession, while offering little sympathy for the man who simply wanted to be loved. The tragedy becomes one-sided. Good horror should unsettle us with uncomfortable truths about life, not deliver ideological lectures dressed up as scares. Obsession had the bones of a great cautionary tale. What we got instead was a love potion story corrupted by contemporary feminism. One more example of how wokeness is draining the fun, the universality, and the honesty out of popular entertainment. So, does that ruin the movie completely? Absolutely not. Now let's break down some of the things that director and writer Curry Barker has said in the media about the movie. When discussing consent, Barker has repeatedly said the film is interested in questions of autonomy, communication, and the difference between genuine love and possession. He has described the central premise, which is a man magically forcing his longtime friend to love him, as a way to explore where fixation stops being love and becomes something darker. He said he wanted to examine how far someone's fixation on another person can go, and to question what people really mean when they use the word love. If he's talking about Bear pre-Wish, well, Bear comes across more as just a lonely, lovesick young man, not someone who's dangerously over-obsessed with someone. His wish for Nikki to love him doesn't feel so much like it comes out of a predatory desire to have her. It's more like longing heartache. A recurring theme in Barker's comments is that the horror comes from stripping away another person's agency. Several interviews and analyses connected to the film emphasize that the story is about autonomy and consent rather than romance. Barker has spoken out about wanting the supernatural elements to feel grounded, so that underneath the fantasy premise, audiences are left with a tragic story about two people and the consequences of one person's selfish wish. The film examines how loneliness, unspoken desire, resentment, and the belief that affection can somehow be earned or deserved can become destructive. Coverage of Barker's interviews frequently describe the film as a critique of the nice guy mentality and of male entitlement disguised as romantic longing. Bear's character embodies impulses that can exist in ordinary people. Wanting someone to love you, believing your feelings are special, and failing to recognize another person's independence. The horror emerges when those impulses are taken to their logical extreme. So if we boil all his comments down, Curry Barker's apparent message is this: love without consent is not love. Wanting someone is not the same as respecting them. Obsession often disguises itself as romance. Male entitlement can look ordinary, sympathetic, or even nice before it becomes harmful. Real love requires the other person's freedom to choose. This is why many critics have described Obsession as being as much about consent, bodily autonomy, and the mythology of the air quotes nice guy as it is about supernatural horror. And Barker himself seems comfortable with these readings, even if he generally frames the film in broader terms as an exploration of obsession, fixation, and the corruption of love. He has said that writing the character Nikki helped him realize that one of the movie's deepest themes was the difference between real true love and a romanticized version of it. Now, this is my take and my interpretation of everything I've just talked about in regard to what Curry Barker has said. And again, I stress this is just my interpretation. I'm not claiming that this is actually what he believes or what he thinks, but my feeling is that he seems to have a Generation Z attitude toward love and romance, which feels like it's been directly approved by a human resources department, rather than a traditional romantic view of love and romance. It feels more like a business decision between two people where they've sat down and they've signed contracts and consent agreements. Somebody with a more traditional romantic perspective would emphasize things like sacrifice, devotion, longing, maybe fate or destiny, the idea that love sometimes overwhelms reason, and the pursuit of a beloved despite obstacles in your way. Whereas Barker's framework seems to treat love primarily as an ethical relationship between autonomous individuals. He puts a great deal of emphasis on concepts such as consent, autonomy, communication, boundaries, and agency. Obsession appears much more interested in critiquing male entitlement than in celebrating romantic devotion. Curry Barker seems suspicious of certain traditional romantic narratives because those narratives can blur the distinction between persistence and coercion, or between devotion and possession. My disagreement isn't with consent or respect. Those are necessary foundations of any healthy relationship. My disagreement is with the tendency to treat those foundations as the whole story of love. His framework risks reducing love to a set of interpersonal rules. I personally have a more old school view of these kind of things. I'm one that thinks about self-sacrifice and devotion, stuff like that. I also have disagreement with taking age-old classic storylines and deconstructing them for these HR-approved versions of it. So what's my final verdict on Obsession? Technically, and as a horror experience, it's actually solid. Curry Barker's direction shows real skill in building dread on a modest budget, and Indy Navarrete gives a genuinely impressive performance that carries much of the film. Michael Johnston and the supporting cast also do good work, grounding the story in everyday relationships. On pure craft alone, it's one of the more effective indie horrors in recent years. But the thematic execution holds it back. What could have been a pure monkey's paw tragedy, or a dark exploration of a love potion gone wrong, gets poisoned by feminist consent ideology. Instead of letting the supernatural premise deliver raw, universal consequences, the film narrows it into a gendered morality tale where male desire is the real monster. I'm giving Obsession a 7 out of 10. Watch it if you want competent horror and strong acting, especially if you can look past the heavy subtext. Just go in knowing it's more a product of its cultural moment than a faithful addition to the classic Wish traditions. Let me just go off script here for just a minute, make something clear. Compared to most other movie releases of the last 15 years, the amount of stuff that you could actually consider woke in this movie is really very low. As you could probably guess, I'm rabidly anti-woke, and I still like this movie enough to give it a 7 out of 10. Yes, the messaging here bothered me, but I'm willing to bet 90% of people won't even care or notice what's going on consciously. If this movie looks interesting to you, then I wouldn't tell you not to go see it. Just be aware of the messaging they're trying to push upon you when you do see it. As always, if you made it this far, thank you for watching. Feel free to leave any comments, and I will see you in the next video.